I'm going to show you how to make this timer that you see here in the lower left corner. And as soon as you want it to disappear, you can make it disappear easily and have the Fusion composition not have to be the entire 45 seconds, for example, that timer was originally set to. The first thing we want to do is create a new Fusion composition. So put this on your timeline, go over here and enter your Fusion, and we'll just drag this over here, line up tools, and arrange to grid just to keep things tidy. So to make a timer, we're going to obviously want some background, and we're going to want some text to render over that background. So I'll just merge that onto the background. And we are also going to want to control our timer, give it some input values. So to make that easy, I'm just going to drag a rectangle over here and hit F2 to rename this and call it time control. Okay, so now that we have the time control, we're going to go up here, right click this and hit edit controls. And we want to add two things. First thing we want to add is seconds. We'll make that an integer. We'll give an input control and a view control, hit OK. And you can now see it's over here. It shows up as seconds. We want to add one other thing just for convenience. This is not strictly necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. We want frames per second, and we'll give that a default of, mine's going to be 60 frames per second, so I'll just make that a default 60 and give it a couple of controls, and here we have frames per second. So we will be using both of these later. You can see down here on the lower left, to reference this, we can just use TimeCtrl.Seconds, and to reference the FPS, TimeCtrl.FPS. We'll be using these inputs in expressions on the text and a couple of other things to make our timer look good. So for the timer, we're going to right-click the text input and come down here and click Text Timer. And that unlocks this modifiers page. And we can see mode is countdown, timer, clock. We'll leave it at countdown. We don't want hours, we'll use just minutes and seconds. For this countdown timer, I actually want the minutes to reflect the seconds and the seconds to reflect the frames, which will just give something that's moving quickly and give us sort of a sense of urgency, sort of a, really precise, you've got so many seconds left and each second matters feel to it. So we'll go ahead here, click on seconds and select expression, and the same for minutes. Next, for the minutes expression, we're about to put in some kind of ugly expressions, but we'll step through this one bit at a time and explain what we're doing. So first of all, we know that the overall time that we want to measure is captured in TimeCtrl.Seconds. And the total number of frames is going to be captured in TimeCtrl.Seconds times the frames per second, so times. So now that we have the total number of frames, we want to measure the number of frames that are left. So we will subtract time, which time references the current frame. And the next thing we will do is we will divide by the FPS. So we have the total frames and the number of frames that are left divided by the frames per second. So this will give us the number of seconds that are left. Finally, we just want to take the floor of that so that we are left with the actual number of seconds. And I will leave all of these formulas in the description of the video below, so you can just copy paste them, but I'm going to go through and explain them just so you know what's going on. So now you can see nothing is happening, and that's because our time control has no seconds left. So what we'll do is we will bump this up to maybe 10 seconds left. So now we see that the time control, if I slide the frames per second for the first 60 or so frames, we are showing 9 seconds left. Past frame 60, we see 8 seconds left, and so on. I'm only showing 2 seconds here in the slider, so that's all I can render. But we want this part here to show the number of frames. So similarly, we will simply set this to TimeCtrl.Seconds times TimeCtrl.FPS minus time. So that is again the number of frames left. This time, however, we simply want to mod it by TimeCtrl.FPS. So what this will do is this will make sure that this value stays between 0 and FPS. So now if we scrub the timeline, we can see that we count down to 900 and we're at 8:59 for the next second. So we're making really good progress, but we can spice this up a little bit. Before we go any further, go ahead and select this background node and scroll the alpha all the way down to 0 so you can see everything under our text. So the first thing we'll do is we'll style the text by giving it a bit of a black outline so that no matter what the text is rendered over, you can read the text. So I'll click Text, Shading, 2. I'm going to make this a black outline, not red. Enable it. Change the color to black. And you can actually see it already. The thickness is very minor. I'm just going to bump that thickness up a little bit to make it a bit more readable. So the next thing I'll do is I'll add a bit of a progress bar that will slowly slide back as the timer counts down. To do that, I will get 2 backgrounds. This background will be the outline. And this background will be the inside fill, which will also be white. Next, I want to mask both of these, so I will go ahead and add a rectangle to both of those. And finally, I will merge them on top of what we already have. At this point, I can't really see what I'm doing, but that's okay, because the next thing I'm going to do is resize each of these. So we'll make the height initially something like 0.02, just to shrink them both a little bit, and copy that. And now I can move them down a bit. So something like that, let's say 4.5, that looks pretty good. So copy that. Next, I want to make the height and width of rectangle 2, which is the inner fill, very slightly less than the height and width of the rectangle 1, which is the outline. So obviously the width of both of them is way too big, so the first thing I'll do is reduce that to about the size of the text. So that's 0.129, let's just call it 0.13. So I've copied both of those, and I'll zoom in here, and with the fill I want to nudge this down just a little bit, so maybe 0.128, see how that looks. That's not too bad, and height similarly 0.018. There we go. So finally, in order to be able to let this bar slide back and reveal itself, we will want to mask the merge of the fill rectangle. So I will go ahead and drop a rectangle here in and connect it to the mask input of merge 3. And finally, since I want this to mask this rectangle, I can go ahead and copy the width 0.128 and set it on my rectangle to mask the fill. To animate this sliding back, what I would like to do is just animate the center position, like so. Reset that. So I'll right click here and hit expression. And what I want to do is, over time, replace 0.5 by 0.5 minus the width. So to get that, I will go 0.5 minus time, which is the number of frames that have elapsed, divided by the total number of frames. And then multiply that by the width, which in this case is 0.128. And with that, we are done. And as you can see, as I scrub forward, the progress bar slowly slides away. This fusion composition is currently only 2 seconds long, 120 frames. So if I click Time Control, User, and set this down to 2 seconds, you can now see what the entire animation is going to look like as I scrub along. Finally, we want this to appear down in the lower left part of the screen. So to achieve that, we will click here, make sure nothing is selected, Shift Space, XF for transform, select that node, hit Add, and drop it here, holding Shift. With that selected, we can now slide this over and down, and it's where we want it on the lower left part of the page. The last thing I want to do is to make this reusable so that I can drop it in wherever I want in any video. So I don't know if this is necessary, but the first thing that I found that works is to rename media out 1 by maybe adding an underscore, hit OK, select all the nodes, right click 1, settings, save as, and under the Fusion Templates Edit Titles folder, which this may not be the exact path for you, but find it under your Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve Support Fusion Templates Edit Titles. New countdown to, in this case, since I've been playing with these, and hit save. At this point, you want to restart Fusion. And then once you've restarted Fusion, under Titles, be sure you're under Fusion Titles, scroll down to wherever you named it, drop it in place, and you can extend it if you'd like. And by default, it may only be set to 2 seconds, and it'll start going under and do weird things. But you can click on that, hit Fusion, click Time Control, User, and adjust this to, say, 45 seconds. And now you can see it counts down from 45 to wherever you want to make it end, and maybe you can pull on this and have it fade out. So one thing to be mindful of is make sure that your input time FPS does match your timeline FPS. So here under timeline 2, I have my frame rate of 60, and under the composition, I have FPS set to 60. If these don't match, then your timer will not line up. You can see here this is at 1 second and 5 frames, and at 2 seconds and 5 frames, it is just finishing that first second. If, say, this was a 24 FPS timeline, then at 2:05, here, only 24 frames would have elapsed under the Fusion composition. And so this would look like 4436 instead. So that's why we have under Fusion the ability to specify FPS as well. And that's all there is to making a countdown timer. Obviously, you can have a lot of fun changing what this looks like, changing colors, changing styles, but that's the basics of a very simple timer. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope you find this useful.